key feature of simcision is its ability not only to run simulations, but also to allow interactions with a model while it's running. Let's take a look at how to build interventions in simcision to influence your model during a simulation. There are two types of interventions in simcision: actions and events. Events are triggered automatically based on preset conditions, while actions are triggered manually by the user during the simulation. Since actions are user-controlled, let's start with one. Each action is a set of changes applied to the system, grouped under a simple name that describes its purpose. For example, in our model, we are introducing a digital requirements management process in a company. Let's create an action called Introduce a Requirements Tool. First, we give it a name and a description so that users know what it does. Now, let's move on to the most important part, the effects. These define the changes in element values when the action is used. The input fields accept formulas, so we can either apply fixed value changes or create dynamic effects based on the model's current state. Let's test the action. Switch to the Simulation tab, create a new simulation, and start it. In each round, we can plan actions. Let's choose our newly created action in round 1. As soon as we do, you'll see predicted changes appear under the affected elements. When we simulate the round, the element's values update accordingly. And that's essentially what actions are: bundles of effects that users can trigger during a simulation. Let's jump back and look at the other options. The most important thing here is that you can set restrictions to when these actions can be used. One way to do this is by defining resource consumption, basically setting a cost for using the action. Any resource consumption defined in this section has to be spent to be able to use the action. The action will only be able to be used if we have all required resources available in the amount needed. If any resource amount is missing, the action won't be activated at all. The other restriction you can define are requirements. You can add requirements to your action. The action will then only be able to be used if one of your requirements is met. Each requirement contains multiple conditions. Only if all of these conditions are met, the requirement is fulfilled. A condition is usually a check or a comparison of values from a simulation. You could, for example, specify a condition that looks at the target of your simulation, checks its status, and tests if its value is over 30%. Now, the action will only be usable if the element has at least 30%. As long as the value of the element is below 30, the condition is not satisfied, so the requirement is not fulfilled and the action is unusable. You can add all types of conditions. You may, for example, limit the rounds the action is choosable in. Or you could build dependency chains that require that another action has to have been played first. Or you could only have the action usable if the value of a resource dropped by 500 in the last 3 rounds of a simulation. As you can see, you can get quite specific with your conditions. You can also limit how many times an action can be used in a single simulation. This overrides all requirements. When the action is used up, it's gone. For even more customization, you can adjust visibility settings to control when an action appears in the list. And under Design, add an image for the action's notification pop-up. But let's keep it short and jump straight to the events. Events work similarly to actions, but are triggered automatically. They're great for modeling risks or other dynamic system changes. Let's create an event called Update of a Requirements Tool. Just like with actions, we start by adding a title and a description, and then we define the effects, what happens in the model when the event is triggered. Since events are automatic, they require triggers. Triggers define the conditions under which an event happens. They work like action requirements, but with one key difference. Every event needs at least one trigger. If no triggers are set, the event will never occur. A trigger can have multiple conditions, and all of them must be met for the event to activate. If you don't specify any conditions, the event will trigger every round, which can be useful for recurring events. You can also add a probability factor to triggers. By default, an event with a valid trigger will activate 100% of the time, but you can adjust this to make it happen less frequently. And, like actions, you can limit the number of times an event can occur during a simulation. Let's test this by setting the event to trigger in round 1 with a 100% probability. Switch to the Simulation tab. When we start a new simulation, the event is triggered immediately. Events happen at the start of a round, before the user chooses any actions. That way, players can react to events as they unfold. Just like with actions, you can add an image for the event pop-up and control its visibility. There's one key difference: events can be completely silent. That means they can change the simulation without notifying the user, which is useful for modeling hidden risks or background processes. One last thing. Once we've created our actions and events, we can group them into different scenarios to create distinct simulation experiences. One scenario might include more impactful events, while another could provide different action sets to test various strategies. When starting a new simulation, the user selects a scenario. In that simulation, all settings of that scenario will apply. You can also add even more customizations by scenario, change all the starting values of your elements, add termination criteria that end a simulation prematurely under certain conditions. See these as game over screens. To provide context, we can also add custom start and end screens that introduce the setting of a scenario. Scenarios, events, and actions allow us to build full-fledged simulation games in simcision. They are also powerful tools for strategic planning, risk analysis, and project management, all built on top of a well-defined system model. And that's our introduction to interventions in simcision. Now you know the basics of actions, events, and scenarios, which should give you a strong foundation to build some interesting simulations with engaging interactions. Stay tuned for the next tutorials. I'll show you how to evaluate your simulations using custom charts, and in analyzing your model, I'll introduce some tools that will help you make data-driven decisions during simulations. Thanks for watching. And remember, every model is wrong, but yours can be useful.